How's it going, everybody? I needed a bit of a break from studying, so I figured I would tackle a quick video. May not be quick, but you get the point. On basically going back through the comments, you guys have been really blowing it up lately, and quite frankly, gives me something to do. So I wanted to go through and answer some questions that came through on the comments section, and go from there. So without any further ado, um, so this guy's been looking at getting started, and I guess I'm the dude decided to start kicking him in the butt, and so good on him. So I'm gonna skip through a couple questions here. I know this guy, he was looking at getting EVNG set up on his Mac, so you do what you gotta do, bro. Um, so I'll start with some of these other questions here, and I want to talk a little bit about the certification. Um, what's the word I'm looking for? Like this. There's a term that I'm trying to think of, and you'll have to excuse me. I've got a buddy of mine who's been pinging me on Messenger all day, trying to help him figure something out. Um, so when I first got in the industry, one of the common things that I was under the impression of was whatever you got certified in is the thing that you work on or in. Meaning that if you're a Cisco engineer, you got your CCNA or CCNP, that all you do is networking. Or if you were, you got to figure, just about 15 years ago when I got started in the industry, the concept of cloud was still a foreign concept to a lot of folks. It wasn't very widely deployed. It was still a very common thing for me to work inside of private data centers. We were working on deploying storage arrays and servers and the networking for all that. And Cisco came out with a whole dedicated data center track. And I think it was like 2011 or 2012. And Nexus was their big claim to fame for data center networking. So, and a lot of interesting things came out of that. So I want to talk a little about this paradigm of you get certified in X, you have to work in X kind of mindset. And while that is true to a certain extent, because especially when you're still relatively new in your career, and I'd say within the first, say, 2 to 4 years, and you don't have a lot of experience, and you're still kind of wet behind the ears, and you're not totally trusted to work on networks by yourself, or you work with a team, or you're working your way up to like a senior level position, things like that. In my experience, when you're in those type of situations, that's the best time to be as wide as you can, because then whatever they throw at you, you're going to be that much more effective in your job. Now I did it the opposite way. I decided I was going to go deep and specialize, than try to be stay in the shallow end of the pool and go really wide and know a lot about or be at least proficient, functional in like Microsoft Server, VMware, Cisco, wireless, data center security, all those things, some cloud. So I decided to take it a little bit of a different path, and I wanted to be like, okay, I wanted to be, and this was because of the fact that I was exposed to it, I wanted to be really knowledgeable in one particular area so that I could have, like, I just be able to dig into my knowledge base of what are all the different technologies that can be used to do this, or if this is a particular scenario that's being thrown at me, how can I take my knowledge of networking and potentially fix it? Things like that. And that's essentially the direction I decided to take, versus being super wide. Now, and being super wide and being like, I don't know, man, I have to go look it up or go test it out. So one way is not better than the other, in my opinion. Now, I've worked with plenty of folks that are, there's a buddy of mine, his name's Phil. He is, I think he's got like 4 CCNPs, and he's able to work security, wireless, data center, route switch, the whole 9 yards, and plus some other stuff like that. And super solid dude. The key thing about him, though, is I was kind of, I guess you could say, what's the word? I kind of envied him because he knew how to do stuff that I didn't. And voice, that was the other thing he was certified in, collaboration now. And so I remember him talking about a particular problem one day, and I was like, huh, okay, how would you fix that? Because I really didn't know. And it was one of those things where, as I was listening to him, I would go, huh. I was already neck deep in service provider at the time, but he was talking about voice, and it fascinated me. Like, okay, well, how does this da 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 thing work? But then again, it's like I've got the tinkerer mindset, right? I like to play with things as we're going along. So, but one thing that I wanted to make sure that I spent a little bit of time on at the beginning of this video is this concept. And this question right here is what spurred it. I was reading through the question, and I was like, okay, well, you do have a legitimate point. So let's talk about that for a minute. So how would achieving the CCISP certificate have benefited you if you had achieved it? Since you're working mainly as a network implementation engineer, pre-sale solutions architect, and you did mention that you had no intention of transitioning into an ISP position, backbone IP, MPLS expert. And the answer to that question is very, very simple. I've been doing implementation for a very long time, and you get to a certain point where I still get the itch to do it. I still enjoy doing it. The thing that I wanted to do, though, that was different from my day job, was my day job for a very, very long time, well over a decade. And I got to a certain point where I won't say I got tired of it, but it's one of those things where I was very, very busy a lot. So I had, I don't know, what was I working on? 6, 7 projects at any given time, and they would kind of fluctuate between all 7 of them at any given time, where I was actively working on 2 or 3, and I was dedicating, several hours per week, plugging on the keyboard trying to figure out how to make something work. The majority of the time, I already knew what the configuration was, so it was just a matter of how do we make this work? Whether it was a migration of one protocol to the other, or doing a data center migration. We had to stand up VXLAN between 2 different data center edges in order to extend layer 2, or it was, migrating from a legacy Nexus 7Ks, 5Ks, 2Ks over to Nexus 9Ks, and getting all of that networking flipped over. Or moving a customer away from ACI over to a VXLAN fabric. I did a lot of data center work, obviously, but I did that for a long time, and it got to a certain point where I personally I enjoyed the work itself. I enjoyed being on the keyboard and figuring things out and coming up with the configuration tasks and the order of operations to do stuff, those pieces in order to get a particular solution working. What I didn't really like was the maintenance windows. I was doing maintenance windows probably once or twice a week on a regular basis, where at 8 o'clock at night I was starting a maintenance window, and I'd say probably 70, 75, 80% of the time they would go swimmingly, and we'd have no problems at all. We would be done in a couple of hours. 10 o'clock at night, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go watch TV and go to bed, or I was gonna sit back and watch a movie to like decompress. But I'd say the other 25% of the time, whether it was something didn't go quite right, we had to roll back, or there was a problem that nobody saw coming, whatever the case might be, we ended up having to stay on the call until the problem was resolved. Whether it was we made a configuration change that broke something, or something happened inadvertently that we didn't see happening. And I got stories for days on stuff like that that's happened, where you're like, oh, okay, well, you've got to go take a look at that to get it fixed. And so, sometimes it was having the customer call TAC, and you're on a call until 1, 2, 3, 4 in the morning because something didn't go the way you intended on it, and so you're exhausted the next day. You go to bed at say 5 in the morning, but the next day's business is still going to happen. And So I was expected to, get a certain amount of work. So on a normal 40-hour work week, for me at least, for probably over a year and a half, on a regular basis, I was pushing 60, 70 hours a week, and um, that was just the norm. You're working from 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night, and then you have a change window at 8 o'clock. And let's assume that the change window went belly up. So you already worked an 8-hour day, and then you're up until 4 in the morning because something went wrong on that change window, and you have to stay on until it's fixed. And then it screws up your sleep schedule because you've been up all night. You lay down, you sleep until say 10 or 11, so you didn't even get a full 8 hours of sleep, and then you're back at it again. But now your clock is adjusted, so you get up and you're working at noon. Now you got to work until 8 o'clock at night because you got a full 8-hour day you have to go do, and then hopefully you don't have a change window that night. I would try to, but it would happen. I can't tell you how many times it did. So you get to a certain point where the schedule and the every week with the amount of projects that I was doing, it started to become taxing to the point where I was just like, I enjoy the work that I do, figuring out how to make stuff work, but get to a certain point where you're just like, you're kind of burnt out, and and it's not like you can go to your manager and be like, hey, I need to pump the brakes, like I need a break. Well, that's not really how it works in the consulting world. I don't want to say feast or famine, but that's kind of what it is. So it's one of those things where it's like you just kind of you deal with it. And on the weekends, I was completely disconnected. There were multiple weekends in a row where I wouldn't even be in my office at all. I would be anywhere else besides the being in front of the computer, because I literally, for the solid year and a half, 2 years, if you notice, I was very, very quiet on YouTube for a very, very long time. And that's because my work schedule was so demanding. I didn't have time to have the interest in doing anything outside of that. So, people ask, well, why do you have 5 servers in your basement? Well, because of the fact that I had multiple customer environments, like staged in a lab, in a sandbox, so I could figure out how to make their environment work at the scale that they're working at, and then get the configuration changes done. Especially when you're looking at multiple data centers. On average, 2 data centers you have, whether they're active or active standby. Then you would have main location. You'd have branch offices that would all connect. So the networking itself, I would end up having to literally build entire customer environments in Eve in a lab, have the server running 24 hours a day, and I would do my absolute best to try to remember to have the configuration saved, and then I would have dedicated repositories where I could, once I get something done, I would literally do a show run on that box, copy the config out so it was saved. Because I would hate to have something blow up on me or have to rebuild something. That would just be more time. So when you're putting that amount of time and effort into doing your job to meet the customer project obligations, it takes a lot out of you. So now, how would achieving the SPCCIE benefit me? The reality of it is it wouldn't. Straight up, and I know that there becomes your rate of return on your CCIEs is basically capped at your first one. Once you get your first one, then you got your first track, you've got your number, and you decide, hey, I'm going to go for a second track or a third track or a fourth track. You can ask anybody that's got 2, 3, 4, 5 CCIEs, and I know plenty of guys and gals that have multiple tracks to their name, that the rate of return on your investment becomes negligible. So the thing is, let's say, for example, let's pick a nice round number. Let's say you've got a CCIE and you negotiate $150,000 a year base salary with the company you work for, and then on top of that you take let's say your bonus structure is $25,000 a year. So every quarter they basically give you $6,500. So that's taxed in half. So let's say your total compensation package is $175,000 for the year. Well, the reality of it is, you go out and get your, say, data center CCIE or whatever track you're going to go after. You get that. You go back to your company and you say, hey, I'm a dual CCIE now. So what are we going to do? Maybe they paid for it. So that's going to be, let's say, $3,000 between exam fees, you travel, hotel, maybe training costs, things like that. We'll say $3,000 to keep it nice and round. Well, here's the thing: they're not going to give you another $150,000 a year just because you earned a second track. They're not going to do that. No company in their right mind is going to do that. What they might do is they might say, well, hey, we'll give you a $10,000 bonus, or we might bump your pay up by $10,000, something like that, or we might give you change your title and give you a promotion, whatever the case might be. Some companies, they don't give you anything at all other than saying, well, hey, thanks for the effort, and that's as far as they go. Every company's different, but you're not going to make 300 grand a year on dual CCIEs. Well, so you got a third. Do you think someone's going to pay you four and a half thousand, 450 grand? Nope. If you were to ask a guy that I used to work with, Roman Rodachev, you can go look him up on LinkedIn. The guy's got 8 CCIEs. If he was to go to work for anybody in the world, do you think they're going to pay him $500,000 a year? No, they're not going to pay him that much. Now he could consult, which he owned a consulting firm for a long time. So, and I don't know the financials behind that, but it's one of those things where in those particular cases you can bill at a higher hourly rate, but the expectation is you're going to be able to deliver on that. So that's what it really comes down to is, what the CCIE in itself, and that goes for anything like higher level certification wise. JNCIE, I don't know what's going to happen to the Juniper certification track now that they've been bought up by HP. But you take that into consideration. You take, say, the VCIX, the VMware Implementation Expert. You take MCSE. You take any of these higher level, expert level certifications. You're not, at least in my experience, I can't see any organization coming to you and saying, hey man, we really want you to get certified and we want you to go get your CCIE. They can push, right? They can be like they can motivate you to try to go do it. CCIE, JNCIE, any literal expert level certification, that's a personal goal. That's what it comes down to. You want it because you want it. Now some people will say, I used it in order to get higher pay. Some people will say they wanted the challenge. Whatever your motivating factor is, that's up to you. I'll be honest with you. The reason I wanted it is because I wanted it because I was introduced to a CCIE. His name is Dan, and the guy had an answer for everything. So I figured, well, CCIE, that's a great place to start. So I went after it because of the fact that it was a credential that very few people had, and even though at the time I didn't think it was obtainable because I was just getting started in networking, it got to a point where I was like, nah, I think I can do this. It's going to take a lot of time to do. But there was conversations had with the family. Listen, this is what I'm going after. I did a lot of research on it. I knew what to expect. I watched video after video after video and listened to hundreds of hours of audio of while I was working on what the mindset, what it takes. That became my primary goal. It was a personal goal. Now I was rewarded. When I got it, I did get a nice bonus. I did get a pay increase, things like that. But my salary wasn't doubled. I think I got a $10,000 bonus when I got it, and then a few months later, the company I worked for, there was an acquisition of another company, and some things happened internally. I won't get into the specifics, but when that happened, basically all the engineers that worked for the company that were the acquirer were pushed out. I was one of them. So I ended up leaving that organization, and I ended up going to work elsewhere. So now what's funny is my pay took a significant hit because the fact that I wasn't planning on losing a job right after getting my CCIE and then having to go find another job. So at that point in time, I was trying to I just went after whatever I could get to get my head above water because I had bills to pay, a family, all that type of stuff. So I had to take those things into consideration. So how would it benefit me? It wouldn't. I mean, my boss has already told me he's trying to advocate in order to get the exams covered by my employer, and he doesn't think that's going to be a problem. And on top of that, I could potentially see a bonus potentially. I mean, we didn't. There's been no negotiation between he and I about, well, if I go get this, I'm gonna need an extra $25,000 a year. None of that has been. None of that has been had. None of those conversations have been had, because here's the thing. A lot of times when companies do that, and let's say you go get your first track or your second, third, or fourth, or whatever the case might be, if they're going to be sinking a ton of money into you for that, they're going to want to hold on to the asset that is you. And they're going to put your butt to work. So in those type of situations, they might come up with a contract or whatever the case might be and say, well, we'll give you a $25,000 bump in pay. Well, I'm being very, very generous with that number, but they might come back to you and be like, but you have to stay here for another year. I mean, that might not be a problem, but it's they're gonna want to make that money back somehow. They're gonna have to, right? Because that's coming off their bottom line. Their profits are going to be going to your paycheck, and they're gonna have to make up for that money somehow. Now, if they're an organization that's got the backing of it, then it's probably not that big of a deal. They're probably going to be able to, you might be a little busier for a little while. They might give you a little bit of a lull, let's say a couple weeks. They give you some downtime for you so you can like decompress and get your mind right. And then you all of a sudden, you went from one, maybe two easy projects to go to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 difficult projects. Because now you're the big dog, right? I don't know any CCIE that's out there that can't handle multiple projects. So but that's kind of the expectation of CCIE, is to be able to handle the complicated, stressful type situations. So that's where that comes into play. So that's my opinion on it. So I want to go through and answer some of your other questions here. Obviously, I'm not going to answer all of them because you clearly have a lot of questions, which fine by me. So would you recommend network engineers EI track to study next cloud or virtualization? Because I think it makes a difference, as in VMware or Azure, Amazon, etc. Well, the thing is, when it comes to once you've hit, let's say, your CCNP in enterprise, what is your current organization doing? Is your current organization, do they have a large cloud presence? Is that the direction they're trying to go? You may not have had that conversation yet. Or it might be, if you're like me, you're always looking for the next thing to dig into. So there's nothing wrong with learning cloud or virtualization. Now, my opinion is this. I would learn virtualization first. I would learn VMware. I would learn ESXi. I learned the data center virtualization track for the specific reason. Excuse me. Let's just talk it back to me. For the specific reason that if you understand how hypervisors work, how storage works, how data center networking works, if you understand those main components and how replication works, if you become very familiar with distributed resource scheduler, DRS, distributed power management, how to power on and power off VMs depending on use. A lot of those and those other things like fault tolerance and high availability, if you learn how those things work and clustering and things like that, and I'm like going through my mind of what are all the different data center virtualization features that are out there. If you learn them from a hypervisor perspective and learn how they work, then what that's going to enable you to do is take that same understanding and map it to basically anything else. Hyper-V works very much the same way that VMware works. Obviously, there's different terminologies and different capabilities and things like that, but you'd have to learn Microsoft, you'd have to learn the VMware, you'd have to learn the Microsoft, You don't have to be an expert in it, just at a high level, and you don't have to take any certification exams, but a high level overview of how everything works would be behoove anyone that wants to dig into that, especially if you want to start off with go cloud. To me, you're taking one step too far. You should back up a step, focus on VMware because they are the de facto standard. I like just about every customer that I work with has a VMware footprint of some size, whether it's on-prem or they have something in the cloud that they're leveraging. There's VMware to some level in their environment, or Microsoft with Hyper-V. But either way, if you learn the VMware world and then you go off and you dive into cloud and they start talking about like EC2 or Elastic Scale, well, that's VMware term. It's VMware capabilities. They're just putting a different spin on it. But at the end of the day, if you spin up, go to your Amazon portal and you create a new Linux box, you're creating a virtual machine on some server that's got a hypervisor installed on it. Virtualized CPU, virtualized RAM, virtualized network, virtualized storage. All that stuff still exists in the cloud. It's just somebody else's data center you're leveraging, and you're paying X amount of dollars per minute, hour, day, whatever for your utilization. So those are things that you have to take in the back of your mind and keep in, understand the differences. So if you understand one way, you should be able to pretty easily understand the other. And then it would just be a matter of learning AWS and Azure. Now, I don't have much experience with Google Cloud. I'm much more familiar with AWS and Azure. So those are going to be down the road. Those are going to be things that I'll dig into. And I was actually having this conversation the other day with my wife, where she's all on board with me going after a second CCIE and going after my CCDE and that type of stuff, because my day job doesn't require me to be pounding on the keyboards to configure stuff or whatever. I transitioned out of that type of a position because for lack of a better term, it burnt me out. I was just like, I didn't have any motivation to go do it anymore. Now, I took a couple of months off, and I was just like, you kind of get the itch back. You're like, it'd be kind of nice to get back into that again. But it's doing the things that I want to do, so the things that I have of interest. And so between reading Nick Russo's book, reading the IP routing iOS 6E and XR book, and going through the CCIE Service Router Blueprint, it was like, and then doing the Enterprise Workbook, it motivated me. It's like, okay, well, maybe it's time for me just to take this. I'm not like going full throttle where I'm spending 80 hours a week or spending 40 hours a week on it. I'm going through the book, I'm labbing stuff up, I'm taking notes on it, and I'm using that time to build out a workbook for anybody that's going after service provider that wants to dig into it. And I'll be doing the exact same thing for NSX once I get time to go dig into that. I'll do the same thing for data center, because long term, it's good to just keep the knowledge fresh. It allows me to dig into something new. I'll probably do the same thing for AWS once I dig into it. Azure, I'm always going to be learning something new, right? That's never going to go away. Even if I don't work with it, I'm still going to be knowledgeable in it in case there's a conversation that I have to speak on. I could be like, oh yeah, I'm good in there, and I'll go to whatever certification level I decide to go to with that. It's just one of those things where, once you have the knowledge, nobody can take that away from you. Even if the certification track dies completely, you can go through and you're always going to have the knowledge, right? Nobody can take that knowledge away from you once you have it. That to me is the key thing. May you please talk about cloud versus virtualization for network engineers? Which one would benefit them more? Which has higher demand? Which has better future salary? And for cloud, which one would you transition to, Amazon, Azure? I basically just answered that. So I would do virtualization, and then I would dig into cloud, because again, one builds off of the other. Is VMware considered cloud or virtualization or both? Because it's a point of confusion for some engineers. Okay, so VMware is it's a virtualization company. That's where they got their start. Back in the day, it was GSX, I think. And then ESX came out, then ESXi came out, and so they've only made it better and better and better as time goes on. If you VMware has their own cloud, vCloud. So, so it's one of those things where if you learn virtualization, you know, again, virtualization makes the cloud what the cloud is at the end of the day. So that's essentially where you would go with that. Suppose I do become a CCIE and then transition to VMware. Wouldn't that mean I would start the virtualization ladder from level 1, while if I stay in networking, I could apply for a consultant or so? Does this feel like a career shift or so? So if you're going to be going from doing CCIE enterprise infrastructure over to end user computing, yes. But again, everything builds off of data center virtualization. Just like the enterprise track is the main track for Cisco, and everything else builds off of that. You can't do security, data center, wireless, or collaboration, or DevNet without having an enterprise implementation, right? You need VLANs, you need trunks, you need routing, you need switching, right? Those things don't go away just because somebody's got, you're now a DevNet guy. So they all build off each other. Data center is the main core competency discipline of anybody that does VMware. That's where they start. They start off in data center virtualization because guess what? In order to do VMware NSX, you need a clustered set of servers to deploy, and you got to have vCenter stood up. In order to do end user computing, you need to have vCenter talking to Horizon in order for the communication to go back and forth, so that I believe it's the composer or connection server, can talk to vCenter about deploying the virtual machine. So at the end of the day, to me, if you're like, I transitioned to VMware after I got done with CCIE, but I was already learning it along the way because the fact that I had customers that were working with it and they needed to dig into it. So in those particular cases, the more you know, that's why I started to diversify. I was like, okay, I had CCIE down, I could use that to pay the bills, right? And then I started learning VMware because literally every customer I've ever worked with has always had a VMware installation of some size. Whether they were moving that to the cloud, whether they were moving to Hyper-V, whether they were going from Hyper-V to VMware, whatever the case might be, there was always some instantiation of VMware. So it was like, well, I'm going to learn what I see everybody using, right? Same thing with AWS. AWS to me seems to be more widely deployed than anybody else. But then again, Azure is also pretty wide. So learning both. Technically there's nothing wrong with learning the big four. Amazon, Azure, GCP, and I believe Oracle are the big four. So there you go. Hopefully that answers that question. What would you advise on the following scenario? I have an opportunity to apply in my company for one of the following positions: troubleshooting position, implementation position. My target is to learn more at this level of my career. What would your advice be? I'm told the troubleshooting would teach me more. Well, it would theoretically, but in order for you to be able to fix something, you need to know it's broken first, which is also goes back to my opinion on automation. You need to know how the technology works before you automate it. So to me, implementation would come first. You need to learn how everything works from the get-go, know the known good configuration to get something working first, and then break it. So one of the reasons why I feel like I did well in CCIE for both route switch and for service provider is because I learned how the underlying technology worked. So I would learn how to get it working, and then I would break it. Okay, what happens if I do this? This is the known output. And that's really where you become an expert, is how can you narrow down what the problem is, identify it, and resolve it. That is why the troubleshooting exam, or a portion of the CCIE lab, was always a ball buster. I can't tell you when people, that's why it's the first part of the day, right? Because you're fresh. I would hate to be troubleshooting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when I've been pounding away at the keyboard trying to get up DMVPN, MPLS, EIGRP, OSPF, BGP, IPsec VPNs, QoS, Layer 2 security, ACLs, NAT, like doing all that all day long, and then you got to go fix something for 2 hours? Oh, shoot me now. That's why all the tracks had their troubleshooting section in the beginning when you're fresh, so that you can get through the 10 tickets that you had and off to the races. So, um, so to me, implementation comes before troubleshooting, but there's never been a time. So, and to me, troubleshooting means NOC, Network Operations Center. People call in when stuff's broken. So, if you want to be an operations person and fixing things that are broken, that's a great place to go. Now, if you want to get experience deploying stuff and stuff like that, you're going to you're going to learn a lot more deploying something or trying to get a particular feature or capability working for a customer that may not be best practice. I've made VXLAN do some things that it's never designed to do. Traditionally it's built to deploy a data center fabric, but if you decouple a lot of stuff and you just use it for the DCI portion of connectivity, you can make things work. I've done it. So to me, implementation first, so you can learn how stuff works, get it working. It sounds like you've been doing this for a while, so to me, you should be able to do both. But to me, troubleshooting, that's a NOC or a TAC, Technical Assistance Center type thing, where you're calling in when something's broken and you're wanting somebody to come in and help you fix it. So you did implementation on very large-scale projects. It seems that you have studied networking, load balancer, firewalls, and implemented them too. Yes, I've done all three, and networking is my main competency. But at a high level, I know how load balancers work, and I've done a lot of work with firewalls. So, but it's every network has them, so you have to learn the things that you're going to be dealing with. What was your most painful topic to learn in the following topics? Service provider by far. Data center wasn't very difficult because I already understood. So the data center piece, so switching wasn't difficult. Spanning tree was a pain in the ass. Normally I don't ever cuss, but nobody likes spanning tree. Once I learned how spanning tree worked, and then I understood how routing worked, and then I understood how layer 2 extension worked, like why would you ever do spanning tree? So always build your networks in triangles. Triangles are your friends. Squares are the devil. So switching was out of the gate when I first started was difficult. Then routing, obviously, which ironically, I remember taking the route switch exam, and it was my second attempt. Yeah, it was my second attempt. I was walking out of the exam. So I took the CCA lab 3 different times. April 28th, 2015, June 28th, 2015, and then October 19th, 2015. And I remember walking out of the exam, all 3 times I took it at RTP, North Carolina, and all 3, David Blair was my proctor. I don't think he does it anymore. But I walked out of the exam, and there was a couple dudes that were taking data center. One dude was taking security. I think there was only 5 of us taking the lab that day. It was a Sunday. Or Saturday? I forget what day it was. I think it was a weekend though. I think it was a Sunday or Saturday. Anyway, it's not important. I have to go. Hold on. So it was a Sunday. I took the lab on a Sunday, and I remember walking out, and we were all comparing notes. 'Cause that's what you're gonna do, right? Like, you're not technically supposed to do that, but whatever. We're outside of the building. I was walking towards my shuttle bus, but nice day out too. So I remember walking out there, and the guy, he goes, "What, are you taking route switch?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You mean route with a little bit of switching?" I go, "That's basically it," because route switch was this much switching and this much routing. But anyway, so routing was complicated. Then data center. Data center from the old days before they added ACI. ACI is complicated, but give me a month, I could learn it. Service provider by far is much more complicated than data center, in my opinion. You've got way more moving parts. Multiple autonomous systems. You need to know IS to IS, OSPF, BGP, segment routing, MPLS traffic engineering, segment routing traffic engineering. You need to be an expert in both IPv4 and IPv6. So there's a lot more that goes into service provider. In my opinion, when it comes to network complexity, service provider by far. Now, granted, I've never taken or never really dove into security or collaboration, so I don't want to take anything away from those tracks either, or the people that have taken those tracks. But in my opinion, um, you've got two different operating systems to learn in service provider. But and going through right now, it's always been it was a struggle, but I'm not going to give up on it. Where data center, you've got Nexus, you've got ACI, you've got fiber, you got storage arrays, iSCSI, fiber channel, things like that. And I really haven't dove into how they square out security. I spend a lot of time on security's got a lot of different operating systems. You got a lot of different platforms. You've got ASA, FTD. You've got WSA, ESA for your email and web security appliance, and you've got to deal with your malware, AMP, a bunch of other stuff that goes in there, VPNs. So I would say and then collaboration. Um, in my experience up to this point, service provider has been the most complicated thus far. Not hard to understand per se, but most moving parts. But that's just my opinion on it. If somebody was to read this that's got, data center, route switch, and service provider and collaboration, which I know a guy that's got that many CCIEs, he might have a difference of opinion. Congratulations on the pre-sales gig. Thank you. I was surprised you left implementation. You just get to a point where you just need to change, buddy. Can you tell us more about the network arc position? I was told by senior networking managers that network architects, in simple terms, draw. They do not configure, rather the implementation team under them configures. In most cases, yes. We are basically a big fan where, the goal of the architect is to have the big picture of what's going on, the high level design, and then talk to the customer to figure out what they're trying to do. We come up with an overarching design of what we're trying to do, and then we put that into a pretty picture that we can, because a picture paints 1,000 words, right? It speaks for 1,000 words. So as you're going through and breaking it down, it's one of those things where once you have the high level design laid out and it's diagrammed, it's easy then to get into the low level design. So CCDE is high level design, CCIE is low level design. So then you're getting into how things are going to actually work, the tactical. So I work at the strategic level. I talk to customers about the 12, 18, 24, 36 months of what they're trying to do, because oftentimes that's how long it takes to get some solutions in place. Especially we're talking a very large environment, a large organization, things like that. So now you take that back to I can do both, right? But at the end of the day, it's one of those things where the more time you spend on it, the better you're going to be. So you're not going to take somebody that is CCNA level, right? That has only been doing networking for a couple of years, has probably, maybe 10 or 15 projects of small size under their belt so they can build up some confidence and do the work. You're not going to take them and put them into an architect role. They simply are not going to have the technical depth or the technical aptitude to be able to understand all the moving parts of the network. That type of person is going to be an operator for a while. You'll go from, network operations to network engineering into network design to network architecture, and then the architects will be able to see what's going on, understand the needs of the business, be able to articulate that into technical requirements, and then be able to pass that information down. Have you ever worked as a network architect before? If yes, what is your perspective on it, or how do you feel about it? I have worked as a network architect multiple times. I've done both pre-sales and post-sales at the same time, where I've talked to the customer about what they're trying to do, understand the business needs, their pain points, that type of stuff. And that's really how you build opportunities and take those opportunities and turn them into projects. Those projects turn into statements of work, which then you can start billing for. So if I take a customer that is doing, let's say they're trying to revamp their WAN. I'm talking to a couple of customers right now that are doing WAN rebuilds and WAN modernization, is what we like to call it. And they currently are on like a DMVPN type of solution or standard point-to-point IPsec VPNs between their main location, all their branch offices, and all the branch offices are talking to each other, and they've got old style replication through Microsoft or whatever the case might be. So when you really take that into consideration, my job is to come in and be like, okay, well, we can all that complexity. And I know exactly how that's put together because I've done it hundreds of times. Let's look at SD-WAN, and we can orchestrate all the IPsec pieces, and then doing a little bit of overlay routing, we can get all that communication going back and forth. We can stick some SD-WAN appliances up in the cloud, so you'll have all your locations will be able to go over the IPsec tunnels to your cloud providers. You'll be able to draw that information back, and you won't need to backhaul your internet because you'll have perimeter devices that are next generation firewalls. So you'll be able to do local internet breakout. You'll be able to bring in relatively inexpensive fiber internet, gigabit circuits, 500 meg circuits, whatever they might be, and then you'll be able to go out to the internet from there. Anything that needs to stay corporate will just ride over the SD-WAN solution, and everybody will be happy. So that's what we talk about. We talk about how we can make their network better. So that's the point of the architect: is what do you got going on today? Where are you trying to go? And let's figure out how to get you there without breaking the bank. And and I talk to customers a lot where we bring up a solution like, yeah, we're not interested in that. I'm like, how come? Well, everything's working fine the way that it is today. Perfect. Best time to talk about it. So, what are some of the things that you're doing today? Like, paint a picture for me of what your network looks like today. Well, we've got, these routers that connect into this, layer 2 network. They're all talking to each other back and forth and all that type of stuff. It's like, awesome. Do you have any idea how much utilization you're using? Well, we have some solar winds and we're taking a look at that. And I'm like, perfect. Great job. So here's how we can make things better. Because you did talk about you wanting to go to the cloud. You got most customers are talking about the cloud. Perfect. Let's talk about cloud. So you're going to deploy a virtual router up in whoever.com, and that's going to be how you connect into it. You're going to have everything backhaul to that. And what we're thinking about is wrong. That's definitely not the way to go about doing it. That's the old school 1999 way of doing things. Here's how we do things in 2024. And go through, you walk them through what the benefit is of a particular capability. You're not there to try to sell them a feature. You're trying to sell them a way to make their job easier. So it's like, I was having this conversation with a customer the other day, and he goes, we were pitched SD-WAN some time ago. It was really, really expensive. I said, yeah, that's unfortunate. I was like, most customers were pitched, and it was rather expensive. But now there's so much market saturation, it's become the norm, where prices have come way down. And I'm like, are you doing any type of encryption? They're like, we are. I'm like, okay, perfect. So what's the average time right now that it takes for you to get your equipment configured, stood up, rack, cabled, power to the rest of the network, get the VPNs up and running? How long does that normally take you? And he gave me probably a week. I said, okay, what if I could make that just a couple of hours? And you don't have to worry about anything. Like the underlying connectivity, as long as you plug it into the internet, within a matter of a couple of minutes, boom, things are just coming online. What if I could make that happen for you? So the initial week of time that a dedicated person is dedicated to that thing is gone from 40 hours down to, say, 2 to 4. And he's like, well, that'd be huge. Like, okay, so let's say, for example, you're paying that person $30 an hour at 40 hours. That's $1,200. If I could take that $1,200 over the course of a given period of time, and you're doing 3 sites a quarter, we did some math, and I did some quick calculations in paper, and I gave him some numbers. I said, right there pays for this other thing. So I can repurpose your money, and that's really what it comes down to. A lot of times it's just budgetary. So you have to be able to understand why the customer has reservations, and then be able to identify those and then work them in a way to highlight the business benefit. You always want to show how you can make the business run better with what with the staff that they've already got, without adding any more complexity to what they've already got going on. So sometimes people are like standoffish, and you have to take that where it comes in. I don't have all the answers, but in most cases I can be like, it's just asking a lot of questions. Like, and I'm not here to, like, a lot of times I tell customers, I'm not here to pick on you. I'm here to understand your reservations, because the better I understand why you're against a particular feature, or maybe you don't have the interest in it, like, that's fine. And one thing that's unique about the organization that I work with, in the sales organization, is I am not a seller. I don't have a quota. What I do is I'm an advocate for the customer. My job is to look at the big picture, and then I work with people that work in the organization that I do to make these things happen. So I have those conversations like, okay, you're going to be working with me, and when we get into the weeds, I'm the one you're talking to. I'm taking that information directly back to my organization. We're talking to the right folks in the back end to plug all the things in, to connect the dots, so that by the time we deliver a solution, it works the way we say it's going to. And they're usually receptive to that. And as I said, the big selling point for me is, normally if you're going to have somebody come in and do a network assessment and all this other stuff to try to identify what you got going on, you're looking at between, $5,000 and $20,000 depending on the level of engagement. And you're getting someone like me that's got a lot of experience doing networking and I've done a lot of assessments. Well, guess what? It doesn't cost you a dime. You're getting all that technical expertise up front. I'm working with you and your engineering team up front to try to get you to where you need to be. So it's, you're trying to make yourself look very favorable to the customer, because at the end of the day, I'm there to make their job easier. And I'm there to work for them. And that's really where it comes down to that. You're there. You want to become a trusted advisor to the customer, or to your, if you're a network architect for the organization. So you work for the company. You're making recommendations for the company you work for. You need to be able to articulate those things, and you can't always be tactical. Your directors, VPs, C-suite folks, they don't give a crap about the tactical. They really don't. They care about maintenance windows, budget, how long is it going to take to implement, what's it going to cost, all these things that are outside of, they don't care what routing protocol you're going to use. They might ask. The lower you get, the more tactical you're going to get. So that's why you have to have those conversations. Favorite fast food meal? I really don't eat fast food. What was the last time I had fast food? My wife has been a big kicker lately with Raising Cane's. So she'll ask me if I want a Caniac, and so I'll eat that. What is your recommendation for an expert SD-WAN in-depth course? Hello, mine. Duh. What is your recommendation for expert SDA? Okay, same question, different topic. I would definitely. I haven't gone through any SDA training, so I know that Kawar K-Bits, and then Orhan Ergon has SDA training, but I haven't gone through any. Best CCIE bootcamp you can recommend? I don't recommend boot camps. I've never been to one. I was able to tackle CCIE on my own, but from what I hear, I know a lot of people that went through NARBIC. I've heard really good results, reviews from NARBIC. I've heard some mixed reviews from INE. So if I was going to go a direction, I probably would go NARBIC. So more dumb stuff from the data center, please. Let me think here. No more dumb stuff from the data center. Let me think here. So this is a story. It makes me laugh, actually. So there was a colo that I used to do consulting work for here that's not too far from where I live in Milwaukee. And the guy that ran the organization, they had 3 different data centers, DC1, DC2, and DC3. And while we were working there, one of the things we had to do was measure fiber if we were going to be deploying new equipment. Everything was multi-mode fiber inside the data center, and so we'd have to run the fiber from point A to point B, which means we were now I'm a CCIE at the time, so I've been doing this for a few years. So yes, I would be I'd be taking we had this long tape measure looking thing that we would fish through the overhead cable trays, and we would figure out what the distance is from device to device through the cable trays. Excuse me. So let's say, for example, that the cable run was 25 meters. 25 feet. That's more real. 25 meters. That's 75 feet. Which isn't unreasonable in some data centers. We'll say 25 feet. We're going from like row to row, right? So I remember being in the data center, and it was, we got the fiber in the afternoon. We didn't have anything going on, so we always would leave one guy in the knock to handle any tickets, and then he would ping us in chat if anything came up where he needed us to, come in and take a look at something. So, remember being in the data center. It was me and this guy. His name is Vince. Still friends with him to this day. And we were working in the data center, and we were fishing the cable. So literally, we just take it out of the plastic bag it would come in, and we would run it through the cable tray. So we would just literally just unwind it through the cable tray. And so I remember this happened at the end of a week, at the end of the day. So I think it was like a Thursday. So we had to have this thing up by the next week. So we were working on getting all the cabling done. We got the cabling done that day. And then we were going to spend Friday, Monday, and Tuesday working on the configuration for the new set of switches that we were putting in. So we were going from a pair of 6509s down to a pair of 3750s. And so we were doing this, and we came into work Friday morning, 8 o'clock. We show up at the knock, and there was a note on my desk and a note on my coworker's desk that would help me run the cable. And it said, "See me in whatever DC1, maybe, I forget whatever DC it was." So we see this. He got there a couple minutes before I did. So I walked to the DC, and I proceeded to get screamed at in the data center for probably the next 10 or 15 minutes. So by 8:15, I'm already pissed off because the guy that owns the company proceeded to yank. So after we went home Thursday, he proceeded to go up, check our work. He went up into the cable trays, saw that we didn't unwind the fiber. We just literally took it out. We unwound it. Literally, we just like on a hose reel. We literally just, we took it and we unwound it inside the cable tray and got it to where it's got to go. Path of least resistance, trying to get the job done as quickly as we can so we can get on to other things. So this fiber had been pulled out. I think was it 4 fiber runs? I think it was 4. Took us a couple of hours. Up in the cable trays, up and down ladders, moving between the things. I'll say a couple hours. I really don't remember how long it was. But it was long enough to where by the time we were done with it, it was good to sit down for a few minutes and not have to think about that. So we come in the next morning, and all 4 fiber runs were pulled out. They were on the floor. And we're like, what the heck, man? And I said, what's wrong? Is something wrong? And he goes, it looked like ass, his words. And if Vince ever watches this, I'll tell him about the video. He'll know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, it looked like ass. And I was like, what does that mean? And so then he proceeds to berate us both. Thankfully not in front of a customer or any other co-workers, but tells us how we should unwind it and make sure that it's straight before we run the cables through the cable trays, because if we don't, then things are going to get hung up. And he goes, did you ever bother to take a look? And he pointed right at me, and he goes, you being the expert in the cable trays to see the straight cable runs? And I'm looking at him like, are you serious right now? And it was probably the most irritated I've ever been. So especially the way somebody was talking to me, and like I didn't know what I was doing. Like I had no clue how to run cable. And so me and Vince looked at each other and we were like, so we'll take care of it. And we just wanted the guy to go away. And so for the next 2 hours, we reran the. Unfortunately, it didn't take as long. Um, we were talking as much crap about the dude in the data center as we could. And anytime we'd hear the beep of the door or the door open, we would be quiet. Um, and then we were in there for probably 45 minutes. And then the dude came back and proceeded to check on our work. He climbed up on a ladder. He goes, and all of a sudden he was happy-go-lucky. He goes, much, much better. This is how it's done. He's like, it looks like some professionals ran it. And me and Vince are, we're on either side of a row, moving the cable back and forth and running it down the cable management. And we're looking at each other like, this guy's a complete tool. So, anyway, fast forward. We get the cables ran. Now he's happy with the cabling. We end up going back to the NOC and getting the configuration set up. And because out-of-band management wasn't set up yet on these switches, we ended up just basically, copying the config from Notepad over the console just to get the switches up and running. We did that. We got everything up and running. We were days ahead, because it's just like there was nothing complicated about the configuration. It was a couple of VLANs, a trunk, a port channel. Everything was good. So I think by the end of Friday, we had all the switches up and running, and everything was good. And I sent out an email copying everybody on it, saying, hey, those switches are up and running, yada, yada, yada. So 15-20 minutes later, this is before lunch, by the way, he comes in, and he comes into the NOC where we were sitting, and he goes, I need to see both of you in the conference room now. Okay. So we walked into the conference room, and he proceeds to tell me that there's all kinds of problems with the configuration, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, where? Show me. So I'm already irritated at this guy for the way he handled something in the beginning of the day. And now he's telling me that I configured something wrong. So he's looking at it, and he's like, yeah, this is wrong, and I had the sheet of paper in front of me of what was needed to be configured. So I spun it around, I pushed it across the table to him, and I said, can you tell me what lines, whatever, there's like a configuration guide. Can you tell me what XYZ is telling me to do? And he had the config pulled up in Notepad on the screen in front of us on his laptop. And he's like, okay. So he looked at it, and he rattled it off. I looked at Vince, and I said, can you tell me what the configuration looks like for that particular thing? And he looked right at it. He goes, what you have configured. And so the boss is looking at both of us like we're idiots. And I said, it's configured correctly. So what is the problem? The customer hasn't plugged anything in, so how could there be... He can't be complaining because he's not scheduled to be here till Wednesday? He's like, well, I'm looking over the config and doesn't match what I would have done. And I go, and what would you have done? And so he showed me, and I looked at it, I go, yeah, this is Cisco Catalyst, not Cisco Nexus. It's not going to work. Configurations are different. And he's like, it's not? I go, it's not. 2 different operating systems. And he was just like, are you sure? 100%. And I'm like, if you don't have anything else, I'm going back to my desk to finish the ticket that I was working on when you decided to come in and tell me that I didn't know how to do my job. So I was already, and so he let the other guy go, but he wanted to talk to me. He goes, I don't like your attitude. And I go, I don't like your attitude. And I'm like, but I was like, you hired me because I'm the expert, and you're going to question my capabilities. I don't question you as the boss and say you're running this organization incorrectly, but you have the nerve to come to me and tell me I don't know how to configure basic CCNA level networking. A VLAN, or I think it was 2 VLANs, 2 trunk links, a port channel. Like, CCNAs do that. And I'm like, it took me all of 15 minutes to configure that. Apply the config, and boom. It took me longer to walk from my desk to the data center and console into the switch than it did for me to configure the switch. And he's just like, well, I don't understand why. He's like, you're getting through stuff faster than I'm used to. I go, but that's because you hired a CCIE. That's what I do, especially when it's something super basic like this. I had that stuff knocked out in a matter of minutes. I was like, I've done this configuration thousands of times. Now, if you really want a challenge, you can like tell me to redesign your, which I already done. I'd actually Vizioed the whole thing out, come up with a bill of material. I wanted to get him off of 6500s as his distribution and core switches from, this is back in what, 2017, 18, over to Nexus 9Ks. We need to do VXLAN, EVPN, this whole thing. And I did the whole thing. I even reached out to a couple partners to get the quotes for the hardware. I presented it to him. He shot me down because it was too much money. I'm like, okay, fine, you're the boss. I don't agree with the way you're doing things, but if you wanted to do things the right way, this is how you go about doing it. So, needless to say, I, because of the way we had been treated Friday morning when we walked in, normally the entire company, it was a small company, like 15, 20 people, came to the knock at lunchtime and said, hey, we're all going out for lunch. And we're like, okay, have fun. And he was just like kind of taken aback. He's like, oh, you're not going to go to lunch with us? And I go, we're like, no, we're good. Thanks, though. And so the three of us, because the knock stuck together, we were engineers, right? We got together and we went over to a local restaurant called Culver's. You might have heard of them. And we got lunch there. And while we ate, we saw the convoy of cars coming back, and they all looked at us. And so then we got reprimanded again after lunch. So, 1:30 in the afternoon or so. That same guy comes into the knock and says, you guys are too good to hang out with us? And I said, no. I'm like, we just didn't want to go where you guys were going. So that's all. You guys always go to the same place. It was either one Mexican joint or this other Mexican joint. And I didn't want to go to Mexican. I wanted something different. So I love Mexican food. You throw some tacos in front of me. What was it? Favorite fast food? I love tacos. Tacos 7 days a week. Anyway, there's the answer to your question. And I was like, so we went and hung out. And so he proceeds to pull me outside, and he starts going off on me again. I go, listen, dude. I was like, there's a big difference between being my big brother and my dad, which you're neither. I'm the oldest son of my family, and my dad's dead. So you can't fill either position, and if you were, I would disown you as a person. I would have no contact with you as a person outside of work. The only reason I deal with you is because you're my manager, and that's it. Like, if you notice, I don't talk to you outside of work. Even when I do see you, I avoid you like the plague. I was like, if you don't have something to say to me in a respectful, professional manner, don't talk to me. And now, mind you, my time at that organization was very short-lived. I ended up leaving because I didn't like the way I was being treated. And so that particular data center instance for that Friday morning was not the straw that brought the camel's back. So I'll tell you about that problem. So one of the customers we had was a local auto dealership that had 3 sites. We had deployed a pair of ASAs, the smaller one, the 5506 maybe. I don't remember. It's been a long time. When we set up site-to-site VPNs between all 3 sites. And so the one site, their fiber circuit hadn't been delivered yet, and so they were still on the other provider's coax circuit. So I go ahead and I'm at this location after hours, and I'd already talked to the owner of the organization, super nice guy, and told him I will be at this dealership at this particular time. So in case anybody, there's nobody there after like 5 o'clock. Everybody was gone. But I showed up just before 5, and the service manager was still there. I told him what was going on, and he said, oh, perfect. He's like, just drop, whenever you're done, just drop the key. He told me where to put it. I don't want to say how that happened, but he told me where to put the key to lock up. He goes, don't worry about setting the alarm. We can do that remotely. I go, okay, just send off an email when you're done. I'm like, perfect. So, and I was used to working by myself. So anyway, I went out there on a Wednesday, and I remember, I couldn't get the fiber circuit to work. I ended up calling the owner of the company a couple times, didn't get through to him, sent him a text message and sent him an email and left him a couple voicemails saying, hey, listen, um, I don't know which port the fiber circuit came in on. I don't know the subnet for the public IP address, so I'm reverting your configuration back to the coax circuit, and we'll have to come back once we get that information cleared up. And I got a call about an hour later from the owner, and he's like, I appreciate you leaving it back in a known good state and leaving me operational and rolling back. He's like, I'm not sure what you guys call that. I was like, it's a rollback. I rolled the configuration back so that I would leave you guys operational. I did test phones. I tested VPN. Everything seems to be working again. Your phones are registering, all that type of stuff. And he's like, oh, awesome. Because I wasn't at the main location. I was at one of the branches. So, long story short, the next morning I go into the office. This is a Thursday. And I had let everybody know. So I let the owner of the company that I work for know. I let everybody that worked in the knock and a couple of other people know that stuff had not gone well. But I rolled back and the customer was operational. And that, to me, that was the biggest thing. Is like I left them working. And so I'm sitting there, and so the owner of the company walks in, and he pulls out picks up a marker from the whiteboard that we had on the wall, and he writes down his cell phone number. And he goes, everybody put this number on their phone and put it in. He's like, put it down as so and so. He goes, put it as my name. And so he does. And so I write it down. And so then he proceeds to tell me, or ask me, how come I didn't call him when I couldn't figure out which port the circuit was attached to, or what the public IP address was. It wasn't the port that I couldn't figure out, because I could play, compare and contrast. What's the word I'm looking for? You try them all until you find the one that where you get a link up. I said that wasn't the problem. I was like, I could find the circuit, right? I could see blinky lights, and there's blinky lights, but I didn't know the public IP address. And he goes, well, isn't there some sort of way to figure that out? I go, so you could, if you don't know the other IP address, which is typically a .1, you can usually ARP for it, but in order for ARP to work, you need to be on the same subnet. And I didn't even know what subnet to put myself on. So I'm not going to poke and hope. You know how many IP addresses are out there? And he goes, again, why didn't you call me? And I go, because I was handling it. And I'm not going to call people for something that it's not a network down emergency. Like, and what are you going to do for me from a networking perspective? Like, I know way more about networking than you do. So if anything was going to happen, I was going to troubleshoot the problem. And I said, the drawback to it is I would have been kind of screwed if anything was broke on the ASA, because I did check, and none of the ASAs that we deployed for this customer have any type of TAC support. There's no SmartNet. So the customer did have a problem where the box died. They would end up having to buy new equipment, which to me isn't the way we should do business. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. I said, if you want to act like a consulting firm, you should be, doing things like a consulting firm, which is what he was trying to do. So he goes, okay, so what are you going to do to fix it? Well, I had the customer forward me some information from the service provider, and now I've got the correct IP address. And he's like, okay. So when are you going to go back out? I said, I'm going back out tomorrow evening. And he goes, on a Friday? I said, yeah, who cares? I was like, it's not going to take very long to do the work. And then he's like, okay. So I did some prep work during the day because I needed to be able to log into the remote ASAs from my location to reconfigure the tunnel IP addresses for the IPsec VPN for the IB1 configuration. I needed to update them to the new public IP address at the location I was at. So we're talking half an hour worth of work. Not very much. And I had it all pre-configured. So it's just a matter of copying and pasting. So I did all that. I got that all working. All the VPNs back up and running. Again, knowing how IPsec VPN works is very, very important. Once I got all that done, I made sure everything was working. He was on the new fiber circuit, and everything was good to go. I left his coax circuit just sitting there. Figured no harm, no foul. So I ended up driving home. So I got home, I don't know, half an hour later. I drive home. I get home. I go to work the next morning. The next morning, I am called into a conference room, and he goes, I'm not happy with the way you've been acting lately. And I'm like, I said, why? Is something wrong? And he goes, well, yeah. You gotta, you act like you don't need any help. And I said, I never said I didn't need help. I just told you that there was nothing that was going on that I couldn't handle myself. And if I don't leave things broken. I said, would you rather me leave the customer down hard? Meaning, like, I plugged their new fiber circuit in, and the internet's not working at that location, and leave them that way, and go home. And then you get a phone call because something's not working, and you've got to scramble to find one of us to go fix it, and then we got to drive out to the location to go fix the problem. I said, is that what you'd rather me do? And he goes, no. I go, okay, so then tell me what it is that I did wrong. And he's like, well, you should have known better the first time. And I go, should have known better the first time. Okay. Well, it's unfortunate because I was given the work to do. I had to do the work Wednesday. I was given the work to do Tuesday afternoon. So I had like 6 hours to prepare, which isn't very much time. Now, on top of the other work. So I got the work Tuesday, and I had to be out there Wednesday afternoon. So I ended up having to get 3 firewalls configured, and then you tell me that the circuit needs to get flipped. I didn't have that information, so I'm not going to leave them down. My bad. And he's just like, well, that's a lot of time for you to waste. I said, well, it's my time. I'm like, it's not like it's not like we have a billing system where I have to log in and put how many hours of travel or how many hours it took me to do the work. I was like, we don't bill against the hours that are available on the project. We're not a consulting firm. We don't act like one. I was like, you're trying to take your NOC engineers and have them do multiple different projects. We're doing consulting work on top of our data center work that we have to do and keeping stuff up and running. And he just looked at me and he goes, well, how would you do things differently? And I go, and I said, I said, dude, I've already been over this with you multiple times. And I'm like, I'm not going to, like, you and I talked when I first got hired that you wanted to build out a consulting wing and you wanted to work with me in order to do that. Well, literally everything that I know about consulting, from the entire time that I've been a consultant, I have built a statement of work, I have put together PowerPoint presentations, and all this other type of stuff, and I wanted to build stuff out so that you would be able to work with me on customers and start consulting, but you've done nothing but fight me. I put together a statement of work that, in the event that there was an emergency, anything after 5 o'clock, or if they called him and he had to call me in order to get something to work, we would, and if it wasn't our fault for breaking it, if something happened, but they needed us to do something, it would cost them $125 an hour. He didn't like that because he thought to himself that was too much money. He goes, how about we do $50 an hour? And I was like, you only think I'm worth $50 an hour to fix something? And he goes, well, $125 seems awfully high. I go, that's half of what consulting firms charge. If you call somebody with my technical status out to fix a problem, what are they going to bill? $250 an hour with probably a 2-hour minimum. It's going to cost you $500 to have someone like me take a look at something. So, like, you have a lot of nice to haves, but you never want to put anything into fruition. So needless to say, he and I went back and forth. And now, mind you, the HR director for the company was sitting in the conference room that entire time, listening to us go back and forth. And we went back and forth for probably a solid 15, maybe 20 minutes. It wasn't very long. And I'm sitting back, and I'm sitting basically with my leg crossed in front of me, and I'm like twiddling my thumbs, and I'm like shaking my foot to try to stay calm, because I'm at this point, I'm pretty pissed off. And I'm getting to the point where I was like, okay, so what do you want to do? Like, how do we fix this? Like, what are your suggestions? And he's like, I don't know, that's why you're here. And I said, you know what? I said, I've suggested everything I can. I don't know what else to do to get you to see my way of seeing stuff. So you know what? I said, I normally would never do this because of the fact that I have more pride in myself than this. But I'm like, I'm done. I got up, I unclipped my badge, I um, tossed it on the table, and I said, I'm done. Like I'm not gonna work here anymore. And I said, I can't deal with someone that doesn't want to, like, you don't really understand what you're doing. I said, and I'm tired of trying to explain it to you. I was like, maybe I'm doing a very poor job of that. I don't know. But needless to say, this isn't working anymore for me. I said, I can't work here anymore. I said, my skill, I was like, you don't want to listen. So, because you're cheap and you don't know what you're doing. So, but then again, I've said that a few times already. So, um, I said, let me go grab my personal belongings, and I'm out the door. And he looked at me, he goes, okay. And so I I walked around, grabbed my bag, and um, turned around. I shook hands with both guys that were working there, and um, as I was walking out the door, um, the one guy that I'm still friends with goes, "Hey man, I'll text you when you're. I'll text you later." I'm like, "All right, dude, have a good one." And my how did I word it? Oh, I took a line out of the movie Heartbreak Ridge with Clint Eastwood, and while the door was still open, I said, "Stay low around," and I used the guy's last name, and he looked at me as really, and I go, "Nobody here likes you, dude." I'm like, you've got two other engineers that are here on borrowed time, and I'm like you treat the network team like a redheaded stepchild, and I said, I'm not going to deal with it no more. And so he opened the door and was like, "Good luck." And I go, "I'm not the one that's going to need it." So I have no idea. Like to be honest with you, I just got an update on that particular boss today, and it wasn't favorable for him or his organization. But I won't go into any more detail than that. But it's one of those things where sometimes you just have to pull the you have to pull the ripcord and just be done with it, because you get to a certain point where you're just like, I can't deal with this anymore. As a matter of fact, the one dude that I haven't mentioned by name, um, he ended up leaving shortly after I did, about a month I think, and then the other guy, he was there for a little while longer, and he ended up he told me that he ended up having to quit because the amount of stress that he was under for the job, he thought he was having panic attacks. That's how much stress this guy would put his guys under, and it's a wonder why, he had such a high turnover rate. I think he had 18 or 19 engineers over the course of 3 years come through his organization. And to me, when you've got that many people coming through your organization that don't stay, and I said, so what happened to most of these? Most of them quit. And so when I heard that, we went back to the knock, and then I found out about this about a month after I started, and I was already starting to regret my decision to come work there. And now, mind you, it was a contract, so it was I was on biding my time. I was trying to be a professional, but it's like he just knew what buttons to push with me, and like I'm not sorry I said some of the things that I did, because sometimes I feel sometimes you need to say some things that aren't people aren't going to like to hear. But he was of the opinion he just didn't care. So long story short, that was a crapshoot of a organization and leadership style. If you ever take a lesson in how not to be a leader, that's a great way of not to be a leader. Leading by intimidation, and um, he was very quick to call you a dick if you were disagreeing with him on something. It was his way or the highway, and it's unfortunate, but some guys are like that. And well, guess what? I'm not a guy that's going to sit back and let you berate me because you feel like because your title says boss. Like, you're not the smartest person in the room. You hire smart people to help the organization do its thing, because you can't be an expert in everything. So I guess that it is what it is. So anyway, this video went way over. I wasn't planning on going this far, but it's one of those things where it's like once I started telling the story, I couldn't shut up. So hopefully that was an interesting story, and you guys can learn from that. So anyway, I've had a little bit of downtime, so I'm gonna go back to. It's getting close to dinner actually. I'm going to go do some more labbing, and I'll catch all of you fine people in the next video.